Good evening, everyone. How's everybody doing on this Friday Eve or mini Friday Junior? We're almost to the weekend. Thank you all for braving the end of the week, the cold that we're not used to be here with us today. It's always a pleasure to be able to come here and share a little bit about all of the studying and the research. And I can guarantee you that every time I get the opportunity to come here and speak, there's a ton that I learn in prepping for this. And so I love the commitment to doing the study and being able to learn, but more importantly, the gift of being able to share that, because as Peter, read in the message, which somehow magically always lines up, you'll notice, I'll even open it back up. He said it was page 209, but you're going to see there's a portion on here that we're going to talk about that basically focuses on the importance of us taking action and really focusing on the responsibilities that we have in order to be able to help everyone that's around us. So tonight's topic, as you can see, the unshakable faith there, in the Gospel according to Spiritism, the word faith comes up 222 times. Now, you might actually go through and count. No, I used technology to my advance, hit the little Control-C on there, it in, and saw how many times it came up. And depending on, the different versions of the Gospel that you may have on the editor and all of that, give or take in that 200 ballpark there. But the point is, it's a big deal, right? It's a big topic. And I think as we start to dive into this, right, the goal of tonight's topic is really going to be to start off with what faith means from just the practical term all the way to religion, and then bring it home with what Spiritism tells us about faith. So to get us started, let's go to just a very basic definition. And so if you go to just two common dictionaries there, Oxford and Merriam, and you ask for just what is faith, the very first definition is very practical, right? We're not even touching on religion. But what it says is, Oxford tells us it's the complete trust or confidence in someone or something, right? Think about the amount of times that folks may say, I have faith that this project is going to work, or I have lost faith, I've lost the confidence in something. That's all we're really saying there. And Webster defines it as allegiance to duty or a person, can even be seen as loyalty, right? And so before we even take it down the religious path there, all we're really saying here is that it's some kind of trust, some kind of confidence. And this kind of reminds me, a few years back, I'd been in the same career for almost 8 years, didn't feel like I was growing, wanted to be uncomfortable again, right, to have challenges. And I reached out to a friend, and he said, oh, Lucy, you have tech experience. You should really apply for this role at our company. And he sends me the job description, and it's titled Sales Engineering. And I remember saying to him, I was like, Nate, what in the world makes you think I'll be good for this? I've not worked in sales, and I don't have an engineering degree. And he said, Lucy, just read the description, look at it, let me know your thoughts. Fast forward a couple weeks, I interview, I get the job offer. I'm in the role for probably 2 to 3 months, and I sit down with my manager for our monthly meeting, and I say, okay, tell me, you can be honest. Was I somewhere in the no hire pile and somehow those two got mixed and that's how I made it here? And he said, what are you talking about? And I said, I just feel so over my head. I mean, the stuff that we're talking about here, I have no experience with. I don't know what I'm doing. I've been here for 3 months. And he turns to me and he says, Lucy, the tech stuff that comes with the role, you're going to learn. I have confidence, I have faith in you that you're going to get it, right? And so when we talk about faith, it doesn't necessarily have to just be from a religious perspective, but it's really just that trust. And when we think about trust, we can also relate that to letting go of control. Because if we think about it, even in our daily lives, we have a lot of trust that we put in a lot of situations. Think about it, even just driving. In order for me to get behind the wheel, I am trusting that the other folks that are out there know how to operate a vehicle, right? May not seem like it all the time, but if you think about it, if I'm willing to put myself on the road, I am trusting that the other folks that are out there are going to do the right thing. The same thing if I get on a plane, I am putting the trust that the pilot did not fall asleep in class and can safely land that plane, right? So when we're talking about trust in very simple terms, it's often just letting go of the control. And so we'll talk a little bit about how that relates to what we're seeing here with religion and all of that. But the other thing that I want to highlight here is when we do then kind of evolve to the concept of faith in religion, the definition that both of those dictionaries give us there is the strong belief in God or in the doctrines of a religion based on spiritual apprehension rather than proof. So that's kind of an interesting perspective there, right? We're going to dive a little bit into that there, but essentially what we're saying in that definition there, that y'all can look up online, there's no really factual evidence when it comes to that belief in faith there. And Webster tells us something along the same lines, right? It's the belief in traditional doctrines of a religion there. And some of the most, I would say, probably like the most well-known exposure when we talk about faith is when Jesus was getting ready to speak to a large crowd, and a man rushed over to him, fell on his knees, and said, "Jesus, I need your help. I need you to save my son. He has gone insane. I've tried everything. There's absolutely nothing that will help him. In fact, I've gone as far as bringing him to your disciples, and they couldn't help him. I need you to do something." And so in the gospel, right, there's a section there, and all of our talk tonight is going to focus on that chapter. It's chapter 19, and that includes that passage where it talks about Jesus essentially expelling, it lists on there expelling the demon, but we could translate that to expelling that, that spirit that was accompanying that man's son, and instantly healing that man. And so naturally, the disciples went, "Well, hold on a second. We tried all of these things and nothing worked. Why did it work for you? Why did it work when you did it and not when we did it?" And so the answer that Jesus gave, and you might have seen this, he said, "If you had faith as a mustard seed, you would say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it would move. And nothing would be impossible for you." So we find this in the Gospel of Matthew. And I don't know if y'all have seen the size of a mustard seed, but that thing is tiny, right? So what Jesus is telling us here is that even if our faith, no matter how small it is, even if it just exists, we have the ability to accomplish things that to us probably seem unimaginable, right? But he's telling us there nothing would be impossible for us. Now, when he says that, what is he really telling us? Is it just mean we get to do what we want? We're going to be able to accomplish everything, right? And that's going to be what we dive into here. And so in the gospel according to Spiritism, the spirits break faith into two separate sections: divine faith and human faith. And they start off by saying that faith is either, again, human or divine, depending on whether people apply their faculties to their earthly needs or to the heavenly and future aspirations, right? So we have to think about it from the perspective of we're here incarnated on earth. We have needs of a spirit who's here on earth. And so there are going to be things, material things, that our faith is applied to, but there's also things that will apply to our faith, those things that are usually outside of our control, that lead to the heavenly or the future aspirations. And so one of the things that the spirits call out in this particular section here is they say, isn't that exactly what the disciples, were doing when they were carrying out those acts, everything, those experiences and everything that they had learned from Jesus, right? But the part that was missing in that particular case was the faith, was the belief that they truly had the power to cure. And there's another section on here that they add and they say, and this is really interesting, the spirits say, individuals of genius who pursue the accomplishment of some great enterprise, they triumph because they have faith. It's because they feel within them that they can and they have the ability to reach their goals, right? So when we're talking about that human faith, it's the belief and the understanding that we are creatures of God, right? We're created by God, and within us, lives the ability to carry out tasks, right? So it really starts off with us believing in our capabilities, our faculties, our skills to be able to execute the tasks that are required of us here in the material world. And that will also lead us to that divine faith that we'll talk about in just a little bit here. But the spirits go on to continue and they say, if all incarnates were fully persuaded of the power they have within them, and if they wanted to put their will in the service of that power, they'd be capable of accomplishing what until today have been called prodigies, and which are really only nothing more than a development of human faculties. So what we're saying here is all of those things that folks oftentimes see as miracles, right? You think about magnetism, it's heavily studied in Spiritism. It's really a combination of an incarnate spirit and their faith, right? Their belief that they can help, that they can cure. It's a combination of that and the universal fluid. And so all of those things that we oftentimes may not necessarily understand or have been exposed to and can see those things as just material miracles, it happened out of nowhere, right? What the spirits are explaining to us here and what Jesus brought to us in that parable was that it was a combination of that faith, that human faith, that belief that we are creatures of God. And because of that, we have the ability to carry out, put into practice those skills and those faculties that without that knowledge, we think just magically happen. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit here as well. But one of the things that the spirits will also touch on, they'll say, it is certain that confidence in our own abilities renders us capable of accomplishing physical things that we would not be able to do if we doubted ourselves. So check out the importance of having that faith and that belief in us, right? And sometimes that faith and that belief will also come from the people that we surround ourselves with. Because how many times do we run into situations that maybe we don't have the belief in ourselves, but thankfully we have individuals around us that can see our potential, that can point out our ability to succeed, right? And so that's really, really key there. And another thing that they'll add on is they'll say faith that is faltering or failing provides uncertainty and hesitation, which will strengthen the barriers we wish to overcome. This faith does not choose the means to win because it doesn't even believe that it's possible to win, right? So there's also that mental mindset that in order for me to carry out those tasks, I have to believe in myself first. And then once I have that, that human faith, that human belief, that human confidence, that trust, right? That's going to lead me to that divine faith as well, which we're going to see in just a little bit here. Now, we talked a little bit about how the spirits define the difference between the two, but I think it's also equally important that we talk about what it isn't, right? And they make this very clear in the gospel, and they say one must guard against confusing faith with presumptuousness. True faith allies itself with humility. Those who have put their trust in God more than in themselves. Again, the trust, right, that we saw early on there, because they know that they're simple instruments of God, of God's will, and can do nothing without God. That is why good spirits come to their aid. I can tell you there have been numerous times in my life where I have been unsure of how to proceed. Something as small as maybe a project that I got stuck on at work, or other things that have been outside of my control. And before really understanding all of this, right? And it's not to say that I don't have the times where, I feel uncertain, or the uncertainty causes me anxiousness, but the ability to put that trust and that faith in God and let go of that control has been hands down the most healing and peaceful way to deal with the situation. And the part there that calls out the good spirits that come to their aid, how many times have we prayed about something and what feels like is coming out of nowhere? We're in the shower, or we're driving, we're at random situations, and all of a sudden, there's a click. There's that intuition, right? There's that random thought of, well, have you thought about it this way? What about if you do this, right? That's what the spirits are telling us there, that even in the most challenging of situations, right, that faith, that connection with God is gonna be super helpful with the spirits coming to our aid. And the last piece that they kind of put on there is presumptuousness is less faith than pride. And the reason for that, right, is there's a difference between me believing that I can do something and putting all of the effort into doing something, and thinking that I can do everything on my own. There's nothing that's going to stop me. I'm going to get to the end destination no matter what, right? What this is saying is, I have the skills, I have the ability, I have a God who loves me, and I am capable of doing things. However, this is not transferring my responsibility, right? And an example of that would be if, let's say, I have a big test at school, and I pray that I get a really good grade, but I don't do anything to actually study. I choose to binge watch a show on Netflix, and I pray that I do well on an exam. I'm not doing my part. That's not faith. I can't pray to be promoted at work if I'm not excelling at what's currently required of my job, right? That's not faith. Faith is not praying that I win the lotto because when I do, I'm going to buy a huge area for the Spirit to center. That's not faith. That's bargaining, right? And who am I to bargain with God? And so, it's important that when we talk about placing that faith in God, it is not transferring our responsibility, because we have set out the plan for our incarnation, right? And sure, there may be times where things do not unfold or do not play out in the way that we have imagined, but as long as we have done our part, that's our responsibility. Right? Because faith is not simply praying for something to happen and then crossing our arms and not doing what's required of us. What we're saying here is, I'm going to do what's within my control, what's within my responsibility, and then I'm going to have the confidence that the outcome will be what's best for me. Because God is in control. And that loving, that merciful Father is going to make sure that whatever the outcome is the outcome that's best for me. Now, does that mean that it's going to be the outcome that I like? Sometimes, but not all the time. There have been many times in my life where things didn't go the way I was hoping they would go. And in that moment, it was tough to accept it. But then you fast forward months or years, and then you look back and you go, that's why it didn't work. Okay, right? And so the more that we realize and reflect on those situations, the more that we can see that God is always going to do his part. It's up to us to do our part, right? And again, have that faith, have that trust that whatever the outcome ends up being is going to be the best thing that's for us. But it takes action, which we're going to see in just a little bit here. And so as we dive a little bit more into, we've talked about what faith means in practical terms in religion. What does Spiritism really tell us? And this is actually one of the first pages in the Gospel according to Spiritism. And the Spirits wrote, "Unshakable faith is only the kind that can stand face to face with reason in all human epochs." And if you're anything like me, I first had to look up how to pronounce that word. It is epochs. But what it means is that essentially different times. So, what we're really saying there is that faith is in a solid foundation. And it's really the only kind, only because it's in a solid foundation. It can't be shaken. It can actually stand with reason throughout all points in life. And so, as we look at this, we now start to see that when Spiritism talks about faith, it's really reasonable faith, right? And if we think back to that definition that we looked at early on, it talked about faith that was not based upon reason, right? Faith that was not factual. And so just a small little table here for us to kind of make some of those comparisons. The blind faith, as we look at that second line there, it's really rooted in dogma or authority, right? You're going to believe this thing because it's what I'm telling you to believe, right? And when we talk about Spiritism, we're saying it's rooted in evidence, in moral reasoning, and experience. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but what do we really mean when we're talking about evidence? Well, let's talk about reincarnation. How many studies have been done that now actually prove out reincarnation? There's a book that was written by a psychiatrist, Brian Weiss, called "Many Lives, Many Masters." He had a patient that came into his office and had all sorts of issues, did all sorts of treatments, and it wasn't until they did regression therapy and she was able to go back and understand her past lives that would then explain all of the things that she was experiencing in the physical aspect here to be able to work through those things. How many kids have talked about seeing relatives that have passed away that they've never met, right? And have been able to fully describe their grandfather who passed away 15, 20 years prior to them even being born, right? That's evidence. That's what we're talking about here when we're saying that. The moral reasoning, that's also another big one. Does it align with the teachings of Christ? Are we living in a way that live up to the moral values that we talk about? And so when we talk about definition there, we see acceptance without questioning or understanding. And that's a pretty big one. I grew up with my grandparents being very strong Catholics, and on Fridays, we would go to the Spiritist Center with my parents, and then on Sundays, we would go to Mass with them. And I loved that. As a kid, it was great. I got to spend time with my grandparents, my cousins, but I had a lot of questions. And the priest didn't always enjoy that. When I was asking, well, why are we sitting? Why are we standing up? Why do we have to kneel down? Why do we have to do this one thing? And I remember one day he was like, you just need to do it. And I said, okay, so I shouldn't question. Okay, got it. But with Spiritism, right, we're taught to question. In fact, there's a whole book dedicated with over 100 questions because we are taught to question because we want that belief to be based on logic, reason, critical thinking. Is there something that doesn't sit well? Well, let me inquire, let me ask, let me get a different perspective. Again, the discouraging, the questioning there, the lack of evidence, right? And then the kind of the last piece there with the emotional response, with some kinds of faiths, right? And our goal here is not to disparage or discourage any other faiths out there. If everything about Spiritism is about inclusion, love, we're simply calling out differences. And with Spiritism, Catholicism, any other religion that you think about, it's merely a tool. It's a resource, right? What we do with that resource is what matters. What we do with that resource is what's going to make a difference in our lives. And so for some people, that blind faith will work to a certain point. It'll help them lead a positive life, but it may not answer many questions as it didn't for me, right? And that's okay. People are going to have their points in life when they do reach that point of, well, I want to know more. I want to understand why it works this way, why we mean this way, right? And so that's simply what we're doing is we're just calling out some of those differences. And so, kind of that last piece there is really encouraging the clarity, the self-assurance, the understanding there. And what the spirits bring us when it comes to this is they say faith is the mother of hope and charity. In order to be profitable, if you remember that message that Peter read earlier, right? In order to be profitable, faith must be active. It can't grow numb. The mother of all the virtues that lead to God, it must watch carefully over the development of the children it generates. So the faith can't simply be just something that I strongly believe, I strongly have confidence in. But what does that do for me, and what can it do for other individuals? How can I act upon that faith to inspire courage, to inspire faith in others, right? To spark up the belief that someone doesn't have in themselves. So there's got to be some kind of action that I take from that faith there. And the other piece that the spirits tell us is they say hope and charity are a consequence of faith. These three virtues form an inseparable trinity. Is it not faith that provides the hope of seeing the Lord's promises fulfilled? Because if you don't have faith, what do you hope for? Right? And I think that's a really good call out is hope can be a starting point, right? But faith is going to be where it takes us to the next level. Because again, faith requires action. Hope by itself is just a feeling. I hope something will happen. I used to have a manager who I worked with that whenever she would ask people for updates on projects or, how things were going, people would answer with, well, I hope it works. And her answer was always, hope is a girl's name, not a strategy. And I always thought it was the funniest thing. But when you think about it, right, if I just hope that something will come into fruition, but I don't have a plan, I'm not willing to do the work, where the hope by itself isn't going to do anything for me, right? It may be a starting point, but in order for me to kick the gears, I need something more, which is why that faith there cannot be something that's inactive. It needs to help me do something. And the other thing that the spirits bring us here that I find really, really cool is, let me find it here real quick. Oh, yep. So they say, construct the building upon unshakable foundations. Let your faith be stronger than the sophisms and ridicule of disbelievers. For faith that cannot stand up to human ridicule is not true faith. Right? So faith is not about proving out to other people. When we have challenges, it's not really, well, I'm going to prove my faith. It's really more about exercising it. Right? It's the opportunity to put all of the stuff that we're talking about here into practice. We don't need to prove anything to anybody. God knows and understands our deepest feelings and thoughts. We don't need to prove it to him. We just need to exercise it, right? We just need to put everything that we're talking about here into practice. And something else that they bring us, they say, have faith in all that it contains of beauty and goodness, in its purity and in its reasoning. Do not accept faith that cannot be substantiated, the blind daughter of blindness. Love God, but know why you do. Believe in his promises, but know why you believe in them. Follow our counsels, right? So follow the thoughts and intuitions that the spirits provide us, but be aware of the objective we show you and the means we provide for you to reach it. Believe and hope without losing heart. Miracles are the deeds of faith. So again, right? Have the faith, have the belief, the courage, the trust, the confidence, but understand why we have all of those things. And to me, that's one of the most beautiful things about Spiritism, because again, like I shared from a very early age, I would question everything. I'm sure my parents loved that. I know my teachers did in Catholic school. I grew up until I was 11 in Brazil, right? And Catholicism is very, very common in Brazil. And so a lot of the schools there were Catholic schools. I remember in like a Bible class, hearing about God being good, being just, and all of those things resonated with me. But what didn't resonate with me was that I would leave school, and every Friday, once a month, we would go feed the homeless. And so as probably a 7 or 8 year old, I started to wonder, okay, well, he's good, he's kind, he's just. How do I explain that I have a roof over my head and food on my plate, but there are people who don't, and they're living on the streets, they're cold, they don't have food, right? And Spiritism, right, again, the reasoning behind it is what helped me understand all of that. And I can confidently say that yes, it is a loving God, fair, just, but I now have a way of being able to justify, or at least understand, the disparities in life, where the challenges come from, right? So identifying answers to questions that in other places I didn't have. And so that's what we mean when we talk about that unshakable faith. It's having that solid foundation that can withstand even the most hard, unbelievable of questions, right? And to this day, there has not been a question that Spiritism hasn't been able to answer for me, right? And I think that's one of the beauties of it. But again, Spiritism is just a resource. It's a tool. It's what we choose to do with it that really matters. And so to kind of wrap us up here, how do we really, attain this faith? And the spirits make it very clear in this chapter. They tell us, they say, when it comes to faith, it requires that foundation, and such foundation is the perfect understanding of what it is to believe. And in order to believe, it's not simply to see, but it's essential, above all, to understand. So again, that reasoning, that meaning behind things. And they go on to say that faith can't be prescribed. It's not something that you force someone to have. They do say that in some cases, for some individuals, faith almost seems to be innate or from birth, right? Because those spirits are bringing in all of that history from other incarnations. So whether we have it today, we just need to continue to foster it. And if we don't, we just need to start building it, right? So some of the ways here, first one, through prayer, right? It's the easiest way for us to be able to start that connection, right? Because again, the human and the divine faith, how we make that connection, an easy way is through prayer or practicing mindfulness, taking 10, 15 minutes out of our day to block out all of the noise, the social media, the text message, the news, all the things, and just focus. Just be centered. And then, of course, the last piece there, studying, right? The center offers many different study groups. Everything that we talked about here, I guarantee that you're going to see if you come to one of the study groups on a Tuesday, and even more than what we just covered today. But the bottom line here, right, is it just takes practice. It's like teaching a little kid that every time they're getting ready to eat a meal, they should wash their hands. And then you say it once, you say it 10 times, you say it 100 times, and then you finally get to a point where you start to ask the question and they go, yes, I've washed my hands. I know what you're going to say. All of that repetitiveness, right, becomes a habit. The practice becomes a habit. And the next thing you know, it's a very natural thing. And so, again, if it's something where we don't feel like we have that divine connection right now to have that divine faith, it's within our control to start to develop that, to start to foster that, to be able to get us to a point where we do have that solid foundation. And having that solid foundation is not to say that we're not going to be frustrated at times. It's not to say that when a challenge comes, we're going to go, oh my goodness, look at that. What a tough situation for me to handle. Thank you so much. It's not that, right? But it does mean that frustration, where before it could potentially last us an entire month, maybe it lasts us a week, right? Where that challenge would probably send us into a nervous breakdown. Maybe now we freak out a little bit. But then we make that connection. We remind ourselves that, you know what, I'm going to do my part. I'm going to do what's within my control. But for what's outside of my control, this is where God comes in. I have a friend at work who was going through some personal things in the family, health-related things. And she said something that really resonated with me. She said, I trust the next chapter because I know the author, right? And that to me was, oh my gosh, she said that. And I was like, oh, I need to write this down. This is amazing. I can never forget this. Because if you think about it, right, we don't have to know what's ahead. We don't have to be in control of what the next thing is going to be. But if only we can just trust, we can have that faith, that confidence, and let go of that need of control, that'll be where we get to experience and to practice that unshakable faith there. So with that, thank you. I appreciate you all's attention, kindness, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the night. Thank you.
Thank you.